Welcome to this presentation on augmented reality. I'm doing it mostly to explain why I believe augmented reality is the area of technology that is probably, I don't want to say the least understood, but maybe undervalued in the arena of things that are coming on the horizon that are going to be formative and cause a lot of change in technology. So I want to start by just looking at this slide. So the artist here created this image. It's a very old image called the Great Wave of Kanagawa. And I used it because we use the imagery of a wave as just a way to kind of convey how technology can come in great waves and change things. And we maybe overuse this metaphor, but it's an important one because when it does happen, that's how it feels. It feels like a great change has occurred. All of a sudden, there's all these new user interfaces and different ways to use technology. And augmented reality, I believe, actually is going to be, for us, the next wave. When we look at how we interact with computers, there's actually a science around this. It's called human-computer interaction, often abbreviated as HCI. There has only been a few major shifts. In fact, I would argue that to date, there's only been really 3 major paradigms and 2 transitions. The first would be your text-based, your kind of interface where you're just typing on a terminal or a green screen and getting information back from the computer. And then came the GUI, right? All the hard work done by the researchers at Xerox PARC, and then the transition to that moving with Apple, and then Microsoft also evolving Windows around the same time. We moved from a world of text-based interaction to GUI-based interaction. The last transition, the most recent one at least, happened between 10 and 15 years ago when we moved to a mobile type of computing paradigm. Every time we make one of these transitions in how we interact with our computers, we actually increase the availability of the technology to more and more people. We expand the reach. It becomes usable for more people and for more reasons. And that's a very important piece of this. I actually believe augmented reality is going to be the next kind of place that we bring that. And why augmented reality? When we look at all the technologies on the horizon, what makes this so important and different? There's plenty that are important. Quantum computing is a very important change to everything. It's going to change the way we code. It's going to change the way we even think about what computers can do. But not only is it not completely imminent, but it's also fundamentally a lot like AI in many ways. It's going to be a better way to solve many problems. And that's important. So when you look at deep learning and things like that, it doesn't necessarily change the way you interact with computers. It does increase how many ways computers can help, and it increases the value of the answers they can give back to you. But it doesn't necessarily fundamentally change the way that you interact with computers. Same with things like blockchain and Internet of Things. These are all opportunities to enhance what problems we can solve with our technology, but again, not completely changing from one paradigm to another. I want to talk a little bit about augmented reality versus virtual reality, because one of the things that comes up quite often in confusion is kind of mixing these terms. So the important piece to remember is that virtual reality replaces reality. It says, I'm going to take your reality and get rid of it. Doesn't matter. I'm going to give you a new reality. You're going to live in the reality that I create for you 100%. Right? Your body will sense this reality and be fooled into thinking it's its own. Augmented reality, you'll also hear the terminology mixed reality now. That's been kind of being tossed around. They're interchangeable. Augmented reality basically says, I'm going to take reality as it is, and I'm going to add some things on top. So you're still going to experience talking to me, or watching a video, or walking around your house, or whatever you're doing at that moment, or reading a book. But I'm going to have the ability to now give you an overlay, so to speak, of information that will augment that experience through many different mediums. It could be that you're actually just watching TV on a wall behind you, that kind of thing, or you're reading a book, where you've pinned the page, or it follows you in a certain place in your field of vision. Don't do that while driving. But that is the difference. So augmented reality, you keep reality, you build upon it. Virtual reality, replace reality with a completely fabricated one. Now, out of the two of these, many people, besides myself, important people like Tim Cook and other large companies, including Google and Amazon, are all betting big on augmented reality. And the reason for this is that virtual reality, in the sense of it replacing reality, it works very well for certain things, for games, for simulations, for all kinds of specific use cases where replacing reality is important, or experimenting with situations in new realities. But for our everyday lives, for the things we do day to day, that we now use a mobile device for, or a desktop computer, augmented reality is the path to actually enjoy the place that we are, with the value added by our technology. So that is the importance of augmented reality. Here's a little clip from The Simpsons that kind of drives home a point.
But I'm not seeing the user icon. Well, it's me. I'm here. Really here. Hey, Alma, a lot of information about you. Let me just page through it. Oh, stop. Wait, what? Oh, no one can live in a non-augmented reality. I need another pair of glasses. Charlie, your move in Muppet Chess.
Gonzo to Fozzie 7.
Ah, that's Kermit, mate.
Waka waka.
All right, so the point of the little clip is just the Kermit chess at the end, right? That's just one example of what augmented reality can do for us, right? Right now, if I want to play chess, we take out a chessboard, or maybe I play a game on a computer with someone over a long distance. But let's explore taking out the chessboard and working directly with the person in front of you, so to speak. In that scenario, it's a wooden chessboard, it's a marble chessboard, whatever it is, but it's a physical chessboard, and we can, make moves. And if we want to record, we could use a piece of paper or a spreadsheet of what our moves were and how the game progressed. But augmented reality offers a world where certain classes of physical objects may or may not be as important in our lives anymore. Each one of those changes in computing interface and how we talk to them brought with it its own physical changes, right? When we went to mobile, for example, having a car GPS was no longer relevant. Once the mapping software got up to spec on the phone, and the mobile networks were up to par to make sure the data got transferred to you while you were driving around, or at least cached and available, nobody goes out and buys a TomTom or a Garmin anymore for their car. It's very rare. You can, but it's not a big market, right? There's always shifts like that. And augmented reality actually offers the possibility for a new type of shift where you kind of question things like chessboards to see whether or not they're even needed. The other big part of this is shared. So what you're watching right now is a video taken at the latest conference. I think it was the developer conference for Apple. And augmented reality was a main topic at this conference. It was, what they were trying to get developers involved in and see the potential. And here we see two gentlemen. They're playing a game on a physical table that is in normal space. and none of the blocks on the table are real. They're all part of the game. We're viewing it through a person's using a third iPad that's also hooked up to this simulation and walking around the table, so we can see what they see through their iPads. The point here, though, is that they are sharing this experience, right? Virtual reality, especially unless it's set up for like a multiple person simulation or something, is something that you experience. You play the game, you live the simulation. A big part of our technology, which we've learned, especially over the last 10 years, is that it's a shared experience. And this offers a potential for us to share this experience, right, in many ways. So this is just one example of one game, but you can imagine this going further. I mentioned briefly the idea of a TV before, right? So let's do a thought exercise. Why would we necessarily want to buy a TV in an augmented reality world? Imagine that these glasses were perfectly capable of 4K or whatever high resolution in front of my eyes, and I want to see as big a TV as I can fit on the wall in front of me, right? So that's great. But what if the rest of my family wants to watch TV with me? Well, why not? If they have whatever, the hardware is, imagine that these glasses were the hardware, there's no reason why they can't watch the same show as you, or maybe they don't like your show and they can watch whatever show they want, or they can go do something else completely. So that is the value here. It's not just a one person show. It's not just something you experience in solidarity. It's just something that everyone else can experience with you. When I was making this slide, I actually had another cool experience, and it was something that provoked a thought exercise, which my daughter came in and she was dressed up like, this, I can't remember, it's from a show she watches, PJ Masks or something like that. And she's dressed up like a cat or an owl or a bat. I'm not even honestly sure. But it was really cute. And I thought to myself, wow, here I am doing this presentation on augmented reality. How cool would it be if instead of just taking a picture of her at this moment, I could actually keep this as a 3D model so that in the future I could see it in 3 dimensions, like she's standing in front of me at her current age of 5 years old, dressed up in this really cute costume with her wonderful smile. And maybe in 20, 30 years, I would love to look back at that memory and more than just a physical photograph. But imagine that she could kind of be standing in front of me, showing me the costume, right? This is kind of that world that we just always imagined that technology would bring us. But augmented reality is the medium through which we can get there. It's not necessarily a holographic image, unless, of course, holographic imagery is the technology driving how my glasses are presenting it to me. But it's not like a projected hologram, although it probably could be. The idea here is that there'll be a new market as well here. There'll be a new market for the 3D models, right? So just like there was an app store in the past for the mobile world, there will be, I believe, markets for artists to create 3D renditions of all kinds of things. I have a painting behind me that one of my friends painted for me many years ago. He's an artist. He lives in San Francisco, does an excellent job. I absolutely love his work. Maybe I would love to have more of his paintings around, and maybe he creates the 3D models of them and makes them available so that I can decide to purchase them, put them on my wall in my augmented reality. And the added benefit is everyone else who comes into my house can see them as well, because we all get to share this reality, right? So this is all very, I'm extrapolating a lot here and guessing a lot on what the future will look like. But all of these things are in the realm of possibility, and I think they will be even likely. Here's another couple of examples of things you can do. This is actually current, by the way.
Built on Apple's new AR kit, you can easily place true to scale 3D models of IKEA furniture in your place. Scan, browse, select, move, and place. So that could mean less of this. And less of this. And probably more of this. We want to make it easier for people everywhere to imagine a better place. Share this place and this place. Try place in your place.
All right, so that's easy to see the value, right? That's, who doesn't want to imagine or do more than imagine what a piece of furniture would look like in your house before you buy it, right? But here's something that you might not have considered. And if you're an IKEA shopper, it would make perfect sense. I'm sure more than myself of the viewership has struggled with putting together IKEA furniture in the past. What if we had an app to actually help us do it, right? What if it actually showed us step by step in physical space how to assemble that annoying piece of furniture that's going to take me half the day and lots of frustration, right? So there is yet one more way that we can use technology to overlay our physical space in a way that is truly, truly useful. And I think this is, endless. And this is why from the mobile development perspective, I want to kind of bring this out, because 10 years ago when the iPhone and Android were brand new to the space, there was this influx of just new ideas of what we could do in development, and how we could push boundaries and new applications and all this stuff. And this whole new world will be realized again with augmented reality. And the mobile development course is perfect because our current window into augmented reality, since we don't yet have 4K glasses that are this small, we have things like HoloLenses and stuff like that. I'll talk about that in a moment. But really, our current window into it is our mobile devices, right? They are our way to experiment. And while not perfect in their form factor, they at least are our gateway, right? So that is the beauty of leveraging these things here. Now, let's talk a little bit about actual attempts in this area. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here because this part of the presentation isn't as relevant to the class. But remember Google Glass. Google Glass did not actually go away. It did not just disappear as many people thought it did. It went to an enterprise trial run. They worked with a lot of companies like DHL and GE and all kinds of companies. And they found there was actually a huge market opportunity here. The DHL guy can look at a package, it'll scan it, it'll know exactly where that package is supposed to go, and it'll give him step-by-step instructions on how to do it. Same with the mechanic who's fixing the wheel. They can not have to go back and reference the instructions. They can do it right there in real time. The network guy, same thing. What do all these ports do? Where does this port lead? Where should I plug this in if it's supposed to go to, New York instead of Toronto? All that can be overlaid right in front of their face. So there's a huge opportunity here in many ways, and this video is now a great example of that with Ford and HoloLens.
Full scale on top of production vehicles.
What HoloLens gives us is this simple way of understanding extremely complex information that comes from multiple sources around the company.
What we do at Ford is we need to make stuff real and tangible for our customers. The value of faster iteration, clearer communication of a design theme, it matters to everybody from the young designer all the way up to the top level manager.
So you can see there a lot of things. First, they're designing a car, right? But they don't actually need to build a prototype. They didn't need to spend 6 months building a clay model. This was a very expensive process in the car industry. They took the existing car and they're overlaying their new version right on top of it, so they can see how everything's changing. Right there in the menu, you can also see that there's an engineering section, a design section, there's a management section. So this is a very complex new way that enterprises can look at solving their problems. Something that used to take 6 months to a year to design a car prototype can now be reduced down to weeks to maybe months, because we've taken out all of the time it took to build the physical models and change them. It's all virtual now. So there's a lot of promise here. I'm not going to spend a lot more time here. I think that that point has been kind of driven home through the previous slides, or at least I hope it has. But there's an opportunity to reassess a lot of things, not just pictures on the walls and TVs. Those are just the starting points. But a lot of physical objects in our space may no longer be relevant in certain circumstances. If you don't have to touch it and feel it, if it's just really a visual thing, there's a high probability that change will be involved there. And that brings us again, right, to the disruption part. I mean, look at how big Amazon has become. They're floating right near Apple as far as physical size of their company and their value. They have been for years showing disruption to brick and mortar stores, and now we're seeing big stores like Sears and such finally starting to buckle to the pressure, right? This could be yet another path of disruption. This could be yet another way. Like if I'm Sony and Samsung, am I even going to manufacture TVs in a few years, right? So these are important questions to ask, and there's a lot of areas that could experience disruption. So now the really important thing to just kind of wrap this up with is to just try to get a feel for, all right, I get it. This is obviously the future, but there's lots of things that's the future. One day there might be transporters, and that'll be the future. And all this is great science fiction until it's real. So when will this be real? Well, I did look into that because I want to know, and I want to try to gauge my efforts correctly as to put them in the right spot. So I went with data from the best source I had, which was the previous time that we had a change in human-computer interaction. And that was obviously the smartphone, right? And there's actually a decent amount of data on this, and I'll walk through a few aspects of it. So first thing to note is that the very first smartphone, the very first thing that was classified in the area that we would consider like an iPhone or an Android today, was the IBM Simon. And it was made in 1994 as a research project. And there was obviously a large gap in time between 1994 and 2007 and 2008, right? Lots of things happened. And what's interesting, though, is that even though there's this long time frame of, innovation and maybe even a little early adoption, once things pick up, they pick up rather quickly. This chart here is showing the market penetration of the smartphone, and you can see that in December of 2007, only 6% of the population used a smartphone. And remember, pre-iPhone and Android days, we had the Pocket PC, and we had the RIM products, the BlackBerry products. There were products out there. They were different fundamentally, but they were not, completely different. The ideas were still there. The implementation was just off. And I think that's kind of the era we're in right now with augmented reality. I'm not picking on any particular product. I just think we haven't had that moment where one product stands up and says, hey, this is the right way to do it. And then there's a whole lot of activity and things progress, right? Before Android and the iPhone, we didn't have app stores. We didn't have the new vehicle for developers to get their products out into the world. It was all still largely driven by buying software in a box on a CD, right? So there's many facets to this. It's not just getting 4K resolution in my glasses, although that's a big part of it, right? But I'm going to come back to this market penetration and just put it up there so you can see, once the pieces fall into place, how quickly things can change, right? There's actually good science behind this, and there's a theory called the theory of diffusion of innovation, right? So basically the idea behind this is, I'm not going to go deep into it, but you have your innovators, you have your early adopters, you have your early majority, your late majority, and your laggards. The laggards are, they still have CRT televisions, even though they're not selling them anymore. So that's the only reason they're going to buy a flat screen television, because now they can't buy their CRT television anymore, right? So, but the innovators are the people actually like on the front lines who are building the stuff. They are, right there with the new technology. Early adopters are the people who were willing to wait in line for an iPhone for, however many hours, even though they could have went, 2 days later and just walked into the store and bought it because they had to have it first, right? Now, the important piece, though, the really important piece is actually the early adopters, because it's the early adopters that convince the early majority to actually adopt. And once you have the early majority adopting something, then it just kind of cascades. And there's a terminology for that called crossing the chasm, right? So it's this magic number, I think it's around 17% adoption, where once you reach that number, it all just kind of happens naturally over the chart that we saw here, right? So if we look at that on the timeline, here is where we cross the chasm in mobile adoption. So right there, around 17% or thereabouts, a little before it, right after the iPhone and the announcement of the first Android phone, that is the point where we started to have the early adopters convince the early majority that, yes, this is good, this is purposeful, it does add to your life, and you want to use it, right? Because the majority is generally skeptical. They're not going to try it until someone else has, and basically then it's, okay, maybe this is working. So the idea there is for augmented reality to become a real thing, we need this kind of situation. We need to get to the point where we're going to cross the chasm. So when might this happen? This is speculative, but it's something that I think is a pretty good way to look at it. The best way I could think is to pull up search data on augmented reality and see what's happening, right? What's the chatter? What's the hype? Are we seeing an increase in people talking about it? And on, first glance, it doesn't look all that promising, right? It looks kind of flat, but let's look at this over time. Let's see what happened here. So the first spike up here, this makes sense, happened along with crossing the chasm of the mobile world, because the mobile world, like I said before, is our first opportunity to actually use augmented reality. Even if it's not in its finished form, it does allow us to do so. And there were early attempts at this. So what you're looking at in that browser window up there on the old Android phone was something called Wikitude, which was it would actually overlay, if you looked at a important building or something through the camera, it would actually overlay information about it. There also was AR Toolkit announced around the same time. And that allowed you to use like QR codes, things like that, where when it saw the code, it would overlay a 3D model on top of it. So there was some early interest, right? And then there's a spike here when Glass is announced, because that was a lot of there was a lot of hype around that moment, especially in the innovator and early adopter category. People were really excited about this, and this was the first product that was almost felt real. How well would it hold on, and what could we do with it? And there was a lot of concerns over the camera and all this, but all that aside, there was a decent amount of conversation about Google Glass, right? So we have the spike, but then nothing, right? Just kind of trails off. Later, we have another spike, and what's that? Well, that's Pokemon, right? Everyone remembers the weeks of Pokemon craze that occurred during that summer. I remember people wandering around outside on campus, and they seemed like they were just aimlessly going to bump into things, and then they started grouping together to kind of go in groups, and it became a thing. And there are people who still play Pokemon, but the craze definitely went away after everyone got their fill of it. And I think this also talks to the limits of using mobile technology in augmented reality. Like, augmented reality needs its own hardware to fully blossom and be experienced correctly. Holding a device in front of your face to get a small window of the augmented reality just isn't going to be the best long-term solution. And I have a feeling that things like Pokemon Go show the interest, but why they don't survive long-term is because of that kind of failure there. And the last thing here is very interesting. The last thing here is the announcements of both Apple's AR kit and Android's AR Core. We're going to talk more about those as we get later in the course. But the announcements of the development kits from the major players in the mobile space is extremely important because it gives developers the tools to create the things that get out there in the world that all of a sudden you had no idea was going to be a thing. And one developer had the idea and gets it out there, and all of a sudden it's the greatest thing. So the tooling is starting to become in place that will allow things to grow from here. So this is really good, but of course, here we are at the end and we're tailing off again. And if we look at this whole thing since mobile was announced, it's all flat. So, that's not necessarily really that impressive, right? So what does this mean? So what can we compare it to? Well, I did a similar query for smartphone, and I did this looking at it before and after we crossed the chasm, right? So what we're looking here on the left side is all search terms for smartphone before we crossed the chasm and afterwards, obviously after. Now, it's important to note that Google's trends data only goes back to 2004. So I wasn't able to, go past that. I wish I could have. It would have been nice for completeness. But I think because it's the data I have to work with, I think it actually, works pretty well the way it is. Let's take a quick look here at what some of these peaks were and what the interest was, right? So we had the Palm Trio, the HTC Titan, which, by the way, I had that phone. I enjoyed it very much. Those are back in the days when you'd show it to your friends and you're like, oh, it's a computer in your pocket, and then they'd look at the start menu and they'd be like, well, that's impossible to use. And they were right, because it was horrible. But I didn't care, right? I had to carry that thing around. In fact, I had an HP Jornada that I bought back in 2000. That was a PDA. Because I was going to live on Block Island for the summer, and I was going to be living in a barn that was converted to like a dormitory for summer workers. And it had electricity and plumbing, but it was not the kind of place you'd want to have a computer. And I could not imagine not having a laptop or something that I could safely have. So I went out and got a Jornada and used it probably all the time to do nothing productive, because it was hard to do anything productive on Pocket Word. But I had it and I enjoyed playing with it, and I later started trying to develop for it. I also had early Palm Pilots. My personal interest in mobile was extremely high very early. And that obviously probably puts me in the innovator early adopter category for mobile. It's important to note, though, that everyone's different, and you'll find yourself in different areas of of the spectrum for different things. So, for example, with electric cars, I personally love. I have a V8 powered sedan, and I personally love the sound of a V8. don't think I'm going to be giving that up anytime soon. I love, even though it's not as perfect, I love its torque curve. I love everything about it. I'm old in some ways. So I might actually be on the laggard side of the spectrum when it comes to finally adopting a Tesla or something. But we'll see. Everyone's different, and that's important to remember with these things. But here we are, peaks, valleys, iPhone announced, iPhone released, all these important dates. Later on, this kind of talks to maybe where we are today. It's hard to say. Android and iPhone SDKs are announced, and the Apple Store opens, and then boom. Now, once you cross the chasm, everything looks pretty good, right? You could almost draw that arc with the arc we had before of the early majority and late majority adopting and then kind of falling off with the laggards, right? Because everyone else already knows what a smartphone is. Nobody's Googling it anymore. But look at this line, right? Before the chasm, it's exactly the same thing. It's completely flat. It looks 100% like the last slide. Now, that does not mean that I know that we're crossing the chasm tomorrow or next week or a month from now. A lot of that is going to depend on this. Where is AR's iPhone? So right now we have HoloLens, we have Google Glass hung around. The one in the bottom there is actually Intel glasses that unfortunately they stopped the project. But it looked extremely promising. It used I forgot if they called it a Linode or I'm probably confusing it with the Linux cloud service, but it was a laser projection in your eye, which sounds extremely unsafe, but they promised it was. But it was extremely good. And the early, The Verge did an article on it, and a couple of other places. The early press that got some time with it said it was extremely good, and it put Google Glass, essentially to shame and how natural it felt. And just look at them; they look like glasses, right? HoloLens, you're not going to want to wear it around every day, but HoloLens does some amazing things, right? So when we get to the point of a technology like HoloLens, here, when and if that's possible, it's possible to win, that's going to be a big deal, right? The other ones up on the side there are mostly VR, but this is the big question, right? When does this become something that everyone in the world would see valuable and not inhibiting, their natural life, right? And for right now, this is why it's so important to our class, we have AR tools in Android and iOS phones, right? And any other mobile device, right? So the key is keeping it intuitive. There's going to be lots of work here, and we're going to talk about this when we get to the design part of the class as well. Design is so important to everything. I mean, I've been developing now for probably more than 15 years. I'm an engineer in my heart and soul, and a lot of time engineers are like, design, designers do design. But here's the thing. Design is what makes your application that great application versus just another blah standard application, right? So what are going to be the new breakthroughs that make something like augmented reality intuitive, easy to use, and just where the majority looks at it and they're like, well, yeah, obviously I need that. I need, 150-inch TV on my wall that doesn't actually exist because it looks great and I can see my movies on it and I didn't have to buy a 150-inch TV, right? So those are the things that are just going to make or break it. There's going to be a huge, just like there was with mobile, what are the main design elements, right? So we have all these gestures and we could pinch and we could swipe and we could do all these crazy things and we have cameras and sensors and our devices could interact with the world, right? The same kind of changes are going to happen with augmented reality. So what can we do to put ourselves in a mental mindset to find those new ways of thinking about how technology and humans interact? Voice user interface, I think, will be huge in this, huge leap forwards. This is its own thing. I mean, Google Assistant, Alexa have both been making great strides forward. I wish I could say the same about Siri. I don't know what is going on with Siri. Had a good start, and then it just kind of like done. But Google Assistant in particular is just been blowing my mind recently, and I personally use both Alexa and Google Assistant. Google Assistant's just way beyond what Alexa is doing currently, but they're both growing. They're both doing well. Watson APIs have been showing up more and more in different games. There was a Star Trek game recently that you could do, which is pretty cool because if you think about Star Trek, you're the captain and you got this whole bridge crew. You could spend all day on a keyboard trying to like select the right crew member and pick from a menu what you want them to do, or you could just act like a captain and talk to them, right? So I think voice is going to be a huge part of this, as well as obviously, there'll be some gesture-based stuff, I'm sure, as well. But the fact that voice user interface is growing so well and natural language understanding is coming to a real place right now, where it is truly, truly usable, and you can actually have a conversation with the computer. That's going to be a catalyst that helps augmented reality move forward. So I just want to wrap this up with, I do feel right now that augmented reality is kind of in this area of disillusionment. We've had some recent failures. The Intel Vant is the glasses that I showed before and are right here. There was also Cast AR. There was a lot of hype around some other companies and nothing really seems to have come from it. And there have been some success stories too, but it's just kind of this moment where people are probably looking at it and saying, well, it's just too not real, and no one's going to walk around with HoloLens on their face and that kind of thing, right? It's not useful and it's not transparent. But one day it will be, and I firmly believe that. So we're just looking for that day when it is. But the purpose of this was really to get you guys thinking about how we can build for the day when it is, right? Because, say it's 3 years from now, my personal thought is somewhere in the 2 to 5 year range is when we're going to cross the chasm. But I could be off, but that's just my take. I think it's, on the low end, it's 2 years. That would be somebody stands up in the next year with the AR version of the iPhone on stage, our next Steve Jobs, so to speak. But on the longer end, it's probably 3. I doubt it's or 5. Sorry, I doubt it's more than that. But when it's time, if your mind is already there, you're going to have ideas ready to go, right? So that's where we want to be. And we can use our time here in our mobile development course. And it's pushing, this is a 700 level mobile development course, right? So we're pushing what we can do with these mobile devices as hard really as we can, right? We're pushing our knowledge. We're going to have to use the camera. We're going to have to use the sensors. We're going to have to overlay reality. We're going to have to think through design considerations of how you're going to use this thing. So it's going to be an exciting, exciting project. And I think that we're going to have a really good time with it. And I hope that you get to take away from it some experiences of, just thinking new ways about technology. So with all that said, congratulations on getting through the material in week 1. And I will be talking to you again in week 2.